I'm Luca Giliberti, contributing writer for Gold Derby, and I'm excited to talk about Ozark with cinematographer Shawn Kim, who boarded the show for its fourth and final season. So, Shawn, I read that you wanted this final season to really come full circle visually for it to bring back to the show's initial signature look. So, to start things off, talk about pursuing that objective.
I think it was more thematic in that respect. It wasn't physically exactly getting back to the exact look, but it was kind of more in the nature of it, because that first episode, is one of my favorites of television. That's why I was so excited to be asked to do this. But it had that really tense noir, some of the most noir things I've seen, elements that I've seen on a TV show, because it had presented so much danger in such little time. It goes and the danger just ramps up out of nowhere, and you really felt it. So it was more trying to capture that feeling again, where, over the seasons, we got to see this story between the Langmores and the Birds, and it's kind of almost Shakespearean in a way, where they're just kind of these opposites that are intruding into each other's lives, and it expanding the narrative and the characters. You start getting lulled into a sense of, oh, I know what's going on. So in this final season, it was kind of taking that and then really kind of getting the audience on their heels a little bit again, and then putting them in the shadows more, and kind of making things darker, not necessarily entirely just visually, but just a overall sense of heaviness and darkness, and kind of feeling trapped in a way, sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, in season 4, we're obviously not just in the Ozarks. There are scenes in Chicago and at the Navarro compound in Mexico, among other locations.
Yeah.
But these two locations really create a visual contrast to the Ozarks in very different ways, especially in terms of color palette. How important was it for you to continue to highlight these visual contrasts as you came on board? And how did you sort of add your own spin to their respective looks?
Yeah, it was, it's such an established palette and look, especially going in season 3, which I think they really expanded and really nailed those two polar opposites, almost, with like the burnt rust of Mexico and the saturated cyan of Ozark. And we definitely, and you have a responsibility to take that handoff seamlessly. It should be invisible, the transition. But in talking with Jason Bateman and Chris Mundy and a lot of other people involved, we're bringing this to a close. So there was some room to really kind of give it an arc. So, so one of the ways we kind of did it was working with, I think they had a number of LUTs that they used and CDLs in season 3. And we kind of decided to really use only one, primarily one for Ozark and one for Mexico, and then one for Chicago as well. I worked with the original color timer, Tim Stipin, who's colored every frame of this show. So we really and also my DIT, Ryan Nguyen, who I was fortunate enough to bring on and have for several weeks on the show to kind of fine tune that look. And one of the things we did was, obviously we took what they were doing and then kind of expanded it a little bit, and we called it, I think the LUT was called Blue Crush. And it was kind of an icier feel to it, with a lot more dense, shadows, especially as the season was going on. We kept the same LUT, but we would consistently kind of start biting down a bit more. And one of the interesting things we did was, because I noticed the narrative, where, Marty is this guy who's trapped in this situation, and he's really trying to get out, but he's also getting increasingly drawn into the cartel, and he's almost the boss at some point, so I found that intertwining really interesting. So what we ended up doing was, in the Ozark world, especially as the season was going on, you have the overall, cyan look, but we also put in a little bit of the Mexico, burnt rust into like some of the highlights and the midtones and the flesh tones. And conversely, in the Mexico scenes, where it was all kind of saturated, burnt, rust look, we put some cyan into the shadows and into the highlights. So there's a little bit of cross convergence of the two worlds there. So it's like a little metaphor, a visual metaphor for that.
Oh, that's really fascinating. And,
Yeah,
speaking of the Ozarks, I also read that, and I really love this, that you were especially enthralled by the bird's house, which you've
yeah,
described as being one of the stars of the show and have
yeah,
highlighted for being very photogenic. So talk
yeah,
about some of the new angles that the house provided you with this season and how you
yeah,
made use of them to
yeah.
sort of demonstrate new dimensions of this house.
Yeah, I mean, and me coming in as a new guy, I'm going in there going, "Oh my God, it's amazing!" And these guys have been shooting there for 4 years, and they're like, "But it was amazing because it's that gift that keeps on giving. That house is amazing." And I think it's an Airbnb now, and people get to go hang out at
Wow.
the bird house. One of the things we did was we employed, to kind of give the sense let the audience help the audience feel that they're with the characters that are starting to get really stuck in their positions and there's like concrete on their feet almost. We used a low angle prism where we could do these intro shots where we're scraping at floor level, or we turn it sideways and we're scraping against the wall in a very, very heavy way where you have the scene presented in most of the frame, but we're stuck. And it was like being a fly on the wall, but like being a fly on the wall stuck onto fly paper, like glued to the wall. And you're trying to escape, you're trying to see a bit more, but you're constrained by the heaviness of the scene. So it was to add a little bit of weight and gravitas, that we use those type of elements a bit more, and with composition, I think we pushed a bit more of the negative space where you have the important parts of the scene, but you have a lot of extra space. And there wasn't just sometimes it would just be a dark, foreground element, but we took a lot of reference from Saul Leiter photographs where a lot of the foreground was built with like refracted cracked pieces of glass or a lamp shade. And we're slowly moving through it. And it has, hopefully the effect was a bit of a Rosemary's Baby effect where you're kind of leaning towards one frame. So hopefully the audience is actually physically leaning to see more, and it really brings them into the scene, and then you hand it off to these amazing actors that are just unbelievable to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly found myself doing that actually, now that you mention it. And I really do love the bird's house. Would I live there? I'm not sure I would live there, especially with all those windows. Those are very creepy, but I love that. I love that it became such a character in itself. And it's kind of perfect that the show ended there as well.
Right.
And there's one episode from part 1 that I would like to focus on briefly, the 7th installment, Sanctified, which is obviously a game changer. And the last 10 to 15 minutes are as stomach twisting as they are nail biting. But it's really that final shot of Ruth in the car that I found most haunting. And I know that for you, this was also a very special scene to work on. So walk me through the choice of lens, the lighting, the blocking, and everything else that went into crafting.
It's one of those things where, a lot, because of COVID and a lot of other, because of also modern technology, we ended up shooting almost all of the driving shots on our LED stage, and things are going that direction. And sometimes, there's an element where you want to make it so realistic, you're not able to do cool moves that or whatever. You kind of limit the technology to kind of sell the reality of that environment. So we're on the stage. And we had talked about, I talked about with Robin Wright, the director, how do we make this last? I mean, it's the last shot of the first part of the final season. How do we give it something a little special without detracting from what we assumed naturally that the performance of Julia, that is going to be some amazing moment. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in a second. But the gist of the shot was that we were slowly drifting and kind of moving in slowly on her. When you see the windshield and the reflections going, and I worked with the VFX guys that I wanted a look of a part of transition where we're kind of slowly, subtly going through the windshield. So then we were outside the car in a normal process trailer type of shot, and then all of a sudden we're within the cab with Ruth, and it's an amazing moment that they used. That was a rehearsal take. We had done many takes after that, but that was a rehearsal take. And and I apologize to my first assistant, who is Liam, is an unbelievable focus puller. He tells a story with the focus, and it's an incredibly hard job because we are shooting wide open on these lenses. This 50 mil Noctilux that opens up to a f.95. That is that is a paper thin depth of field. So when anyone's moving, you have to be on top of it. So it being a rehearsal take, we use that for him to get an idea of it. And at the very last moment, Julia put her head back, went out of focus, and he goes to chase her, and she leans forward and says, "Ah!" And it's one of those where you couldn't plan it that way, you know. And it reminds you that as crafted and perfect, you know, perfectly executed as this show is, you still allow room for these magical moments that are part of filmmaking, these things that are unexpected, these little head fakes, you know. And that's what is sprinkled all throughout the season. And that shot, I think it was one of the, you know, earlier things that we had a number of, you know, we had 7 episodes left, but we were still in the early part of this. You know, we were there for 14 months, 13 or 14 months. Insane. And it kind of allowed us to kind of keep an eye for, you know, being open to letting, it's not mistakes, but they're just these gifts of you know, randomness that happen, you know, that you're like, well, that's not what we planned on, but it's perfect, you know. So I'm glad the editor chose that take. You know, it's pretty special.
It's very well done, and I think all the emotions in the scene come to.
Sound cuts out, and it's just silent.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then the score in the background, and I think
yeah.
it really comes together very well, and all the emotions come together. And you know, you already mentioned that's the last episode of part 1, and then you know. Then comes part 2, and you have said that as the bird's narrative became clearer, some of the shots, you know, sharpened and more depth and a heaviness were added to some of the frames. So could you elaborate a bit on that?
I mean, it's a very, very shallow depth of field show to begin from the very beginning, and it's intentionally done. You know, the cinematographers who had set up that look, Armando Salas and Ben Kutchins, you know, they employed these lenses. They've used various lenses over the years, but I think on season 3, they ended up on a large format Venice, which has shallower depth of field to start with, and these vintage Leicas, and especially this 50mm Nock Deluxe lens that opens up again to a 0.95. And I was really, really riding the open end of those, you know, lenses where it was paper thin, shallow depth of field. When these are moving, even on a wide shot, it's odd because you know, whatever character's in frame is sharp, and the background's out of focus. And normally you're only seeing that in telephoto kind of lenses. So we employed that to great extent in the first part of the season. But as it went on, we allowed ourselves to slowly, not a lot, but start, you know, closing down on the stop so that a little bit more is in focus, you know, a little bit more of the foreground, a little bit more of the background. Still, you know, a very claustrophobic world, but you start kind of expanding. Like it was like the promise that everything was going to be okay, that you'll be able to see more than there is. And then we took it back, you know, towards the last couple of episodes. And then also with the lighting, you know, the shadows, you know, we increased our, you know, ratios where, you know, the difference between the light part and the dark part is a drastic amount. And when the density of shadows got blacker, it's not to say that the show got darker by any means, but it just, the difference between what you could read clearly and what was murky in the shadows, you know, we kept burying a lot more information in the depths that you make the audience want to see more. And they're, you know, you kind of want them to be like, I want to, you know, turn the lights on up here. And then you give it to them here and there, but you kind of always string them along, you know.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And, you know, again, in regard to part 2, I would like to talk about some individual scenes, starting with the road rage scene in episode 11, which is so unique. I mean, it was directed by Laura Linney, and, you know, it's as emotionally charged as it is, honestly, insanely comedic. And it's very chaotic, and it's shot with a handheld camera, at least for the most part. So what went into that creative decision?
I think everything about that scene, you know, me and Laura spoke at length. That was the pivotal scene for her, and I have to say, you know, working with her, what a unbelievable surprise. I mean, a natural director. I can't wait to see what she does next, you know. But she had such intuition, not only of her character and of all the characters in the narrative, but of camera and of movement. And she had her ideas, and it was so. I'm glad you brought up the comedic element of it. It's the moment where, you know, Marty and Wendy are at their breaking point, and they just snap, and it should be this, you know, wild and chaotic, almost scary moment. But the humor comes, and we spoke about the type of humor it was, and it's like that. It's that nervous humor that you kind of crack a joke, when at the most inappropriate moment, just to relieve some tension. So there was that element. So I kind of followed with the visuals where normally we block the sun out and it's always in shade. That one we allowed some sun to come in, and it was a little awkward because everyone's like, why are we doing this? And Jason knew, of course, ahead of time, but sun's on his face. It's like, wow. And the show is a very heavy rectilinear show with solid dolly moves and very intentional movement. So us taking the camera off and going handheld with it, it was just all in line to just make the audience really at unease. Like, this is not normal. This is not usual. So it was really kind of punctuating all that. And with the handheld, it was not like a Band of Brothers, like really active handheld. It was more like, I was telling the camera operators to basically just hold the camera still as possible. And I use the analogy of like, just imagine you're in jail and you're holding a wet bar of soap. Don't let that go. And so it was the natural kind of, anxiety, internal body anxiety of trying to hold it in. You'd have these little burbles every now and then. So it had, the intention was to just ratchet up the tension as much as possible in every possible way, with the lighting, with the camera movement, and all that, And it was really fun, and it was really fun to see the whole crew and cast really be into it, because it's so different, than a lot of ways that, a lot of other scenes, that the majority of the scenes that we filmed, It was great to kind of break convention for the right reason, for the perfect reason, because it was just, that's the moment that everything's just really falling apart for everyone,
Absolutely. And as a viewer, I was certainly at unease because I was like, what is happening here? And am I supposed to laugh at this because it's very funny? But it really was funny, I have to admit.
Yeah, Laura has some lines on that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And we're actually going to stay in the Wendy Bird / Lori Linney lane and jump to episode 12, which also ends with a haunting shot through a car window. And, this time we're watching Wendy smash the side of her head against the window and just let the blood, run down her forehead. And, it's shot as a tight close up. And what I really love is that the light from the side kind of illuminates Laura's hair. So walk me through how this entire shot came to fruition.
I mean, it was more that, that was more, it started more as like a technical, concerns of like, is it going to be actual piece of glass? What are we going to do? And it was one of those things where we decided where you show a lot by restricting a lot, by denying it. So we didn't need to go overboard and see the banging and then the blood. And so it was much more about her, what the scariest part was the restraint on her face, while she's doing that, and it's jarring. So it was about being minimal in what we show. So, you have a tight lens and you have, very little information beyond just her face and her head. And it was this light that was coming in. And again, I think that was more natural. And it was, again, a lucky moment because it was really cloudy all day, but a little piece broke out, and normally we'd go and cover it, but we let that through, and it highlighted her hair. And it was a weird dichotomy where it was kind of a moment of sunshine and in this crazy dark crack in her psyche, So it was, again, dichotomy and juxtaposition, always in this show.
It really is. It's such a, again, haunting scene. I've used that word a lot, but it's like you said, the restraint in her face and not.
It's scary. It's scary to see,
It is, especially because it's Wendy Bird and you never know quite exactly what's going through her head. So,
well, because her character's so calculated, and it's just it's such an off-putting thing where you're like, is she okay?
Exactly. And what is she gonna do? And what is she gonna do next? I mean, yeah. And, then there's, on a final note, then there's the thrill ride of the last 10 something minutes of episode 13. It's shot at night in the pouring rain. Shades of cyan and magenta are woven into the darkness of the night. And then it ends with a bang, literally and figuratively. So discuss the challenge of, shooting in the rain at night, and then the choice of color palette in this sequence.
I'm glad you brought it up because, because there was, such a focus on one end of the color spectrum, with cyan. Naturally you're going there because it's the palette of the show, but this season, especially because it's the end here, we chose to intentionally bring in the complete opposite side of cyan on the color wheel, which is magenta, and kind of sneak it in, especially in the rain. We could do it to such great effect in the rain because we had talk about a massive rain. I mean, we had cranes with 150-foot antlers of rain towers everywhere. And we were, yes, you could just, normally we would just put rain in the immediate area, but we were putting rain deep in the background. And the producer, why are we supposed to? But it was because we wanted this volumetric sense of this torrential rain. And that's where we could sneak in some magenta, because it was kind of in the air. It wasn't like a direct light hitting somebody's face and they're pink, then that would be too much, but it was senses, little clouds and wisps of the opposing color, because there's that push pull of, Ruth is about to make it out. Is she? I don't think so. Like you don't know. So you're just adding little hints that there's, it could go either way at this point. So and to go along to that point, we even on stage, when we're shooting the driving scenes on LED screen, we were pouring rain in a sound stage, and which made it really feel really real. And I think it really is seamless in you can hardly tell what's shot on stage and because we shot some of the stuff driving in real, on situ, on location. And, it was uncomfortable. Those days were uncomfortable because there were these nights that were long nights, and we're pouring rain, and it was more efficient to kind of let the rain fall in between takes, because instead of waiting for it to ramp up and all this. So it was I wouldn't say it's intentional, but it ended up working so well, because the uncomfortableness of working in that environment really shows up on screen, for better or for worse, but I think for better. But it's, while you're doing it, it sucks, because you're and you can't see anything and everything. And the episode's called Mud, I think. It's just mud everywhere. Yeah. And especially at the Langmore compound, when Jordan is killing Nelson. I'm mixing up actors and character names, but that thing became a mud pit, and everyone just slipping and sliding around. But again, tough, getting tough through that. It's the only way to create that type of scene with that much tension, and I think it ended up being really great because of that, because it was torturous to go through.
I can imagine, it really turned out great. And I also really love how Nelson's death is filmed from Rachel's perspective, from on top of the roof. It's really fantastic, and a perfect segue into the finale, I think. Yeah,
I think so. And again, it's more restrained, because we talked about getting in there close up and seeing he's a big character, but sometimes it's more powerful when you're further away. And it's the idea of killing someone from afar that's more horrifying sometimes than being up close and personal. So
it certainly is. I was very nervous during that scene, I can tell you that, while watching, but it turned out great. Well, Shawn, congratulations on this final season. It turned out very well, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
It was such a pleasure. Thank you.